Hi, this is Tom Cole, 4th District of Oklahoma, and we're having another one of our weekly chats about what's going on in Congress. And it's been a fairly busy week in Congress. For me personally, a very busy week. Was able to get a piece of legislation passed across the House floor with very bipartisan support. It deals with Indian trust land, that is what the status of it is when Indian tribes own land. We had a bad Supreme Court decision about 10 years ago that changed 70 years of precedent, and in doing so, it created two different types of Indian tribes, one that the Interior Department could put land into trust for, which fortunately includes most Oklahoma tribes, and then a second class where they couldn't, and it raised legal concerns about land that had been put into trust previously. Did it really have that status? So it's a tricky issue of Indian law. It's been hard to reach agreement, but we got it this time. It passed with well over 300 votes, so got a substantial majority of the votes on both sides of the aisle. It's one of the few bipartisan things that Congress has been able to do, at least in the House. We also had a number of other bills that came to the floor that really raised some pretty serious concerns about process. Probably the most important one of them in some ways deals with drug prices. That's something where actually the President and the Congress have had an opportunity to work together. They all believe prices are too high. The Energy and Commerce Committee, where my colleague Mark Wayne Mullin sits, actually passed three great bills on drug pricing unanimously, both sides agreeing on them. And it looked like those bills were going to be packaged together, come to the floor and passed and sent on to the Senate and ultimately to the President. Unfortunately, my Democratic colleagues chose to put four very controversial bills and put them attached to these three that would pass. And those all relate to Obamacare and the stabilization of state markets. It's extra money, and so they're very controversial. And sadly, that means the three bills that are popular they'll pass the House, but they'll never be considered, at least in that format, by the Senate. They would never be signed by the President. He actually issued a veto threat on them. So that sort of petty partisanship where we have a chance where we could do something that would be good, that everybody agrees on, and instead we get into a partisan food fight. I just think that's bad for the people, and really it's us, Congress, not doing its job. Similarly, we had an issue of amendments to a bill called H.R. 5. There were 27 amendments made in order. Actually, there were 56 Democratic committee amendments submitted, I think, or 51, I think 16 or 17 Republican amendments. In this case, 25 Democratic amendments were made in order, one bipartisan amendment, and only one Republican amendment. That's going to cause a problem again. So far in this Congress, Democrats have gotten about 80% of all the amendments, and they've shut the Republican amendments out. Republicans have only gotten 14%, even though they're 45 or 46% of the membership of the House. And then there's been a few bipartisan amendments as well, I think around 14% as well, 13 or 14%. So unfortunately, that kind of process means that, again, these bills will pass the House, but they're very unlikely to go anywhere in the Senate, and it creates a natural frustration. Something we've got to get past. For anything to happen in the next 2 years with a Democratic House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican President, people are going to have to be willing to compromise. I think we missed an opportunity this week on the drug pricing bill. Could have had a big compromise, just like we did on the Native American legislation that could have moved through. And I think we could have had a big compromise on H.R. 5 as well. But when you don't allow the other side to have a shot to get any of their amendments in, you don't get much compromise, and you get a lot of legislative gridlock. And sadly, I think that's how we're going to end up this week.